theologian once said this. It's been a very profound impact on me over the years, and that is this, is that you have to understand that Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub is considered the liar, the deceiver, even though he presents as an angel of light. And the reason he hates human beings so much is because we hold a position in relationship to God that he can't hold.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. The entire point of this podcast is to help you grow in your faith. When you grow in your faith, everything else in your life comes into focus. When you grow in your faith, many of the problems you have simply go away. But in order to grow in your faith, you have to realize it takes work. Fluff is not enough. You have to start thinking for yourself, and our goal is to give you the tools to do just that. So welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, a place where you can grow. My name is Jesse Mayer. I'll be your host, but we cannot do this without the one, the only, the Salty Pastor himself, Dr. Douglas Peak.
Hey everyone, so good for you to be here today. I always love these times that we have together, and I hope it really is helping you. You know, I'm trying to throw out ideas and concepts and principles to help you think and grow. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not asking you to say I'm right. I'm just asking you to take what I'm presenting and engage with it and then determine for yourself, right? If you think, oh yeah, this is what my conviction is. This is what I believe. The other thing I'm trying to do is show you how to formulate beliefs in an accurate way. And one of the most important aspects of this is eliminating false belief from authentic belief. And you do that through critical thinking skills. So I'm very excited that we're doing this. I'm glad you're joining us. Our website, thesaltypastor.com, thesaltypastor.com is up and running. Love this. I love this website because you can go on there and you can search all the past episodes. There's over 400 of them based on biblical text or a specific topic. And you can go back and listen to them. So thank you, Jesse, for getting that done. I appreciate you so much.
Absolutely. Well, and I did that in conjunction with Bonnie, who did the database entry side. So we tag teamed that whole project, but I know that people are really enjoying the ability to go through it. So
we love Bonnie.
Yes,
she's so
we
wonderful.
do.
She's behind the scenes, always working so hard. So you can help this ministry continue to grow by going to the YouTube channel, Salty Pastor, and like and subscribe, because we want to get that subscription up to over 1,000 people, and then that gives us a lot more tools to interact directly with the website and directly with you.
Absolutely. Well, on Tuesday, we did a deep dive into 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 9. We talked through all those different verses. And one of the things I thought that was super insightful and very helpful is the notion of sexual desire or sexual attraction and how Paul directly addressed it, right? It's one of those, like, you didn't realize church got so saucy.
They were
when
saucy.
Right? And then you get into Song of Solomon and you really get saucy. But I mean, bringing it back, it seems like that our pursuit of sexual desires is where we can kind of fall into immoralities, right? Like another point that you had brought up that kind of brings us home is that immorality isn't just sort of like a you broke the rule kind of a thing or a law, but immorality is actually this idea of a perversion of God's given drive, right?
Yes.
He gave you something good and it has been twisted and perverted into something different. And if we act on that perversion, it drives us away from God, not closer to him. So I don't know if you've looked at anything outside of a newspaper recently, and even some newspapers, but there's a lot of perversion going on in the modern day, Pastor. So I assume today's episode is going to get a little salty when you kind of brief me on what we might be talking about. So
there
let's
you go.
kick
We got
it
a lot
off.
of things. Well, you know, just kind of give everybody a little context here, and that is that a long time ago,
In a galaxy far, far away?
Well, I don't know. If my mind may be far, far away. But a theologian once said this. It's been a very profound impact on me over the years, and that is this, is that you have to understand that Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub is considered the liar, the deceiver, even though he presents as an angel of light. And the reason he hates human beings so much is because we hold a position in relationship to God that he can't hold. And what he can't hold is he is incapable of creating. Human beings can create. We could create beauty, we could create literature, we could create music, we could create relationships, but most importantly, we create life. And Satan can't do that. And as a matter of fact, he can't create anything. And so his resentment and hatred of you is pure, unadulterated jealousy and envy. And basically, he will do anything to pervert that which you or God has created. That's why he's the great deceiver. He is the father of what? Lies. So he takes a truth, and what does he do? Turns it into a lie, twists it into a lie. And our sexual desires are very susceptible to this because they're so powerful, they're so overwhelming, they're so critical to our position with God, and that is we are co-creators of what with God?
Life.
And how do we co-create life with God? By sexual intercourse.
Yeah.
Okay? So you see why it's such a big deal.
Right.
And so our desires and drives are intimately linked to the thirst of our soul to be intimate with God. And so we also then see how he is attempting to very early on now, and I want this part of a podcast to be a warning to anybody who listens, to give you an awareness of where the danger is. And what is happening is there is an overwhelming emphasis on sexualizing our children. And the reason why is because if Satan can manipulate the drive early on, what ends up happening is they live a life of confusion. And we see this in the fulfillment of these immoralities or things that are bad for us. And that's what's really important. When Paul says this is an immorality, it's very important to understand. He's not saying, hey, there's this rule out there. You may not understand that rule, but you broke it. You're a bad person. That's not it at all. When you actually read what he said over and over again, you start to realize, oh, it's culture that has made me think of an immorality in such a negative way. What Paul's saying is that this is something that hurts you. And when you participate in it, it hurts you a lot, right? He, in the chapter before, he says, if you participate in an immorality that's sexual in nature, you're not doing something outside of yourself. You're wounding your own self, right? And so we see this push to sexualize our children in order to manipulate their drive towards an immorality. And that's what's so sad and heartbreaking. It's destroying kids. Like, for instance, I think of this whole movement called furries. People are like, what in the world are you talking about, Pastor? Well, if you watch videos on YouTube about furries or how to become a furries, it's all about whether or not you like Disney movies. That's where it starts. Says, do you like Disney movies? Here are the biggest furry movies out there, The Lion King, and they talk about all these different movies. It's not a Disney movie, but Balto. And they say, what animal do you really identify with? Okay? And what character do you identify with? What characters draw you in the most? Well, you just might be a furry. And so it's like, act like this character, be this character, okay? And so what's really interesting is they are using, in a very manipulative way for children, a natural psychological development of the brain. And that is, as a brain develops, this is childlikeness, we see it as it's developing and maturing, is that it has a capacity to have transcendence, right? And that's the ultimate adult attitude. And that is, well, never judge a man unless you walk a mile in his shoes. Well, the unspoken premise is, well, we have a capacity to walk in another man's shoes, right? That's called transcendence. Love is about transcendence. Sacrificial love is all about transcendence, okay? But what's interesting is, how do you get from a child, an infant that can't speak, to an adult transcendence? Well, what you do is, as you're developing, you resonate and identify with various things. And one of those, when you're young, is animals. Right? And it's called the anthropomorphizing of animals. You see human qualities and traits in them.
Right.
Okay? It's very interesting. People who have autism or are mentally disabled tend to have a high connection point with what? Animals. Right? They tend to like animals more than they like adult human beings. Now, so what I'm talking about is a very important thing here, because what the manipulation is attempt to use this natural process, Disney movies of all things, and create sexual attraction. Because according to the National Institute of Health, being a furry is all about who and what you are sexually attracted to. It says, and I quote from the website, if some furries are sexually motivated, they may be motivated by an erotic target identity inversion. So there is an erotic target identity inversion. Sexual arousal by the fantasy of being the same kinds of individuals to whom they are sexually attracted. Did you catch that?
Mm-hmm.
Furries with ETII would experience both sexual attraction to anthropomorphic animals and sexual arousal by fantasizing about being an anthropomorphic animal, because they often change their appearance and behavior to become more like anthropomorphic animals. We surveyed 334 male furries recruited from the internet about their sexual orientation, sexual motivation, and sexual interests. A large majority of our sample reported non-heterosexual identities. 84% are not heterosexual identity. And some degree of sexual motivation for being furies, 99%. Male furries also tended to report a pattern of sexual interest consistent with an ETII involving anthropomorphic animals. Both sexual attraction to anthropomorphic animals and sexual arousal by fantasizing about being anthropomorphic animals were nearly universal. So being a furry is not, well, do you relate to Simba, on Lion King? Or it's all about, as you move into puberty, sexual attraction. And it's all about an erotic target identity inversion, okay? 99%, okay, sexually motivated by being a furry. So it's all about sexuality. So today we have schools that are putting kitty litter boxes in bathrooms so that furries can go to the bathroom when they're at school. There's other schools that are having to deal with furries who walk around in, it's usually cat outfits or leopard outfits, biting and scratching other females. So if you're a normal girl going to school, you have to tolerate this, okay? And so it is a big issue. What's so strange is, that the Bible had a name for this in the Old Testament? Bestiality. Okay? This has been around a long time. And people are like, wait a second, isn't that different? No. If you go back and you look at Mesopotamian philosophy 3,000 years before Christ was born, when you go down into Egypt and you look at all of the hieroglyphics that they have up there, what did they worship? They worshiped Ra, the sun god. Yeah. They worshipped animals. They worshipped these things. Part of the entire creation account in the book of Genesis that Moses recorded was to say animals, moon, sun, stars, water, wind are not gods.
Right.
They are things that were created by the creator.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is important to understand. And so you don't want, people don't understand that thousands of years ago, who you had sexual relationship with was more of a spiritual thing than it was just a physical act of pleasure.
Right.
And so people wanted to have sex, sexual encounters with animals because they believed it would endow them with those spiritual qualities that they anthropomorphized on those animals, which is exactly what the NIH is printing on their website. And so the Bible's very specific. This is an entirely sexual identity movement, and it is focused on your children. And if you can get children to think their identity is an animal, then as they grow up, a different sexual identity is the norm. It's not, you see what I'm saying? It's not abnormal.
Right.
And so do you see how they're using this movement to recruit children and sexualize them and confuse them about their actual sexual attractions and identities?
Yeah. I mean, I think understanding that this isn't just like, oh, this is a fun phase that my kid's going through where they think that they're, a tiger or whatever, right? Just being really aware that this can lead to something much different, right? Like, because I know, kids will play and mock battles when they're little and be like, I'm a lion, you're a tiger, and we're going to fight, right? But it's like it can very quickly escalate out of control if they're not solidified in truth and going, okay, there's make-believe and then there's
and
truth.
That's exactly, see, Mr. Rogers nailed it because he always said, let's go pretend. Let's go to make-believe.
Right.
He never said, this is who you are.
Right. So you're not inherently saying never let your children watch a Disney movie. You're just saying make sure that they're aware of real, authentic, true reality and make sure that they don't get led down a path that could lead them to something
what
much
I would
worse,
do is
right?
say, let's pretend we're tigers.
Right.
Let's make believe we're cats.
Right.
What would a cat do?
Right.
Da-da-da. Isn't it fun to pretend to be a cat?
Yes.
See, just that simple little word in
Changes
there
everything.
changes everything. So,
Well, that's not probably the only immorality that's going on in our world, is it, Pastor?
well, no, there's a lot of others. I was really shocked on Tuesday. When I read that verse 1 of chapter 5. Remember the issue.
In 1 Corinthians?
In 1 Corinthians chapter
Okay.
5, remember when I said that he goes, there's an immorality that even the Gentiles don't practice, and that was a man was having sexual relationship with his father's wife.
Right.
And now scholars aren't sure. Most scholars don't believe it was actually his own mother, but there's no guarantee
Right.
of this. Whatever the case, whether it was his stepmother or his mother, he was having sexual relations with his father's wife, meaning this woman was still married to his father. And what's even more amazing in verse 2 is that the whole church knew about it.
Right.
It wasn't like a secret. Everybody knew. They even put it in a letter and sent it to Paul and said, oh, look, Paul, we're tolerating this. Aren't we great? And Paul goes, no, you were missing the boat. And so that's what's so interesting about it is that it wasn't just happening, but it was happening in front of everybody. There's a phrase in Hebrews about sin. If you go on sinning willfully, and the word willfully is kind of like high-handed. It's like raising your hand and waving and saying, look, Mama, look what I'm doing. It's just terrible. It's terrible. And so it's in your face kind of a thing. And the whole church knew about this. And so one of the things is that illicit sexuality has become very normal in our society today. And that is pornography is illicit sexuality. It's really fascinating, and that is that if you're married, men, there is no quicker way to hurt your wife, undermine the intimacy on a spiritual level with her than to look at porn. Women, if you are married, there is no quicker way to undermine your husband's self-respect than to read romance novels all day and wonder why your husband isn't more romantic. You see, it is very bad. So what I tell men is that if you don't want to do that when I'm married, do not believe the lie that you'll stop when you fall in love.
Right.
That's a lie. It's an immorality. And what Satan does is he tries to trap you. If you have a certain diet and you fall in love and get married and she modifies your diet, well, you're gonna go back to what you were eating. Within 5 years, you'll be eating all. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
You'll go, and usually it doesn't take that long.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Is to say so that. Ladies, if you spend your entire fantasy life of dreaming of falling in love and reading romance novels all day long. Now, if you go to a rom-com, you read one every once in a while that a friend recommends, or you read one of these, what's really popular, these historical Christian romance novels, set in historical piece. If you read one of those, that's fine. I'm not trying to say that that's wrong, but what I am saying is that when you develop a habit and you bring it into your marriage, it's going to impact your marriage
Yeah.
No
I think,
two ways around it.
I mean, what those can do is the same thing that porn does for men, where it can distort what reality is, right? And what you
Yes.
should be expecting. And that's the pitfall of both of those, is you start thinking and looking for something that isn't achievable, authentic, real, because it's all made up, right? The books are made up and all of these things, right? You know, there was the huge vampire thing back when I was in high school, where everything was a vampire and the girls were all like, I want, so attractive. And it's just like, calm down. This is not realistic. It's like wild. You watch like the Twilight movie and that guy's just like sitting in this girl's room, like watching her sleep. And you're like, you get arrested for things like that, but they think it's romantic. And you're like,
yeah, really?
No, you get arrested. You go to jail for things like that. That's not romantic. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Well, it's so interesting that way is what that does in particular, ladies, if you'd like to consider this, is that when you read a lot of romance novels, what you do is you go, oh, that is so romantic. I wish my husband was that way. And you think that that's an innocent perspective. But what that does is that cheats you or stops you from seeing all the ways that your husband says, I love you, that you never know.
It's shifting your perspective.
Yeah, because you're in comparison. You know, I know this one lady, she was talking one time about how she knows her husband loves her, and I said, well, how do you know that? And she says, well, I have this flower that I use and everything. It's a special flower, and he always buys this flower, and it is always in the pantry. She goes, every time I go in there and I see a new bag of flour, I think, and at first I thought flour like FLOWER.
Right, like plants.
No, not plants. She meant ground flour.
Right.
And I was just like, at first I was like, okay, this sounds weird. But then I started thinking about it, and I go, you know what she's done? She said, I have trained myself to look for all the ways that my husband loves me. And then she's like, I get all these, romantic feelings whenever he does this stuff.
Right.
Right, for me. And I think, wow, what a great thing.
But and that doesn't make it into the romance novels.
Never makes it into the romance novels. It's like, my husband always pumps my gas, or my husband is always changing the oil in my car. My husband is, you know what I'm saying? It's like, in a lot of ways, that's a man's love language, is he does something,
right?
For his wife. And so I think another place that is huge today that we have to deal with is the whole notion of same-sex attraction and same-sex identity, right? It seems obvious to me that the scriptures teach that same-sex attraction, this may sound weird from the salty pastor, but it's obvious to me the scripture teaches that same-sex attraction is real and very powerful. Okay, just by the nature that it addresses it. It's real. So if someone has a same-sex attraction, if someone has experienced same-sex attraction, everything you feel, everything you sense, what you are attracted to is real. And you will have a physiological response to that, right? Your pupils will dilate, your palms will sweat, you'll feel things, right? It's if you have participated in a same-sex relationship, you will experience many of the exact same things as a male-female couple will experience. You'll bond on some level. There will be bonding going on. There will be emotional entanglement, right? It'll be very tight. If that relationship ends, there'll be tremendous grief over the loss of that relationship. I was reading this book by this guy, Caleb Kaltenbach, and it's interesting because his mother and his father hooked up in college, and she got pregnant with him and gave birth to him, but they weren't married very long because he was gay and she was a lesbian. And so they lived raising him in the GLAAD movement, the GLAAD movement, and he went to all the pride parades. He did all that kind of stuff growing up. And in his book, he talks about how when his father, it's really interesting because his father and his mother have both become Christians now. And what happened with his mother is when her lover died, he was there for her during her grieving process. And it was through the grieving process that she became a follower of Christ. So the point being is that everything you're going to experience at this level is real. I would never say it's not real. Your emotions are real. Your attraction is extremely real. Your sexual desire is powerful. It is very, very real. However, that doesn't mean it's good for you. Okay? That doesn't mean it's what's right for your soul. Case in point, all research shows the highest rates of atheism, secularism, naturalism, humanism is among the LGBTQ plus community. Okay? In the general population across the globe, less than 10% of people are atheist, right? Don't believe in God. Among gay males, it's between 80 and 90% report being atheists. That is a dramatic difference. As a matter of fact, you can almost track the percent of atheists, people who don't believe in God, almost, and I'm not saying there's a cause, but there's a strong correlation to the actual percent that say what? They are a part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
So the notion that there isn't something spiritual going on there is just false. There is, and figuring it out for you is what's best. One of the most interesting things about having a conversation with someone on these issues is you have to be aware of the different definitions of human nature and human identity. This is a really big deal. For instance, in Christianity, what is the definition of human nature? And that is that I'm created in the image of God. I have value. I matter to God. But my nature has been tainted by sin. So when you come up to me and say, man, you didn't tell the truth, or you took advantage of that situation, or you did this, you call me a sinner, I'm not offended. Right? Because you're not making a statement about my identity, because my real identity is what? Created in the image of God, and it is what God came down from earth to die on the cross for and save, right? And redeem and to heal. And so I want more of that.
Right.
And so when you say, hey, you're a sinner, I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. Yeah. But thank you for pointing out that I'm not becoming what I really want and who I really am.
Right.
You know? On a side note, also because I know who I really am, you can't call me a sinner to manipulate me. That's not going to work. But what's really fascinating is if you have to realize when you talk to an atheist who's a part of the LGBTQ plus community, particularly in a same-sex situation, you are not saying that you're not saying your sexual attraction is wrong and the real you needs to come out. Let me phrase it this way. You think what you're saying is the real you is in there, and this is what we love, and your sexual attraction is deviating you from discovering the real authentic you and letting it come out to really quench the thirst of your soul. That's what you think you're doing. In other words, if someone were to point out your sin, they're doing you a favor, right? But when you say that to a same-sex person, they're not hearing that.
Right.
What they're hearing is they have a different definition of their identity, their nature than you do. So what they hear is you're denying my existence as person, right? You're denying my personhood.
Right.
And so that's why they respond with, that's a phobia, that's bigotry, that's that. And from one standpoint, I say, oh, well, I disagree with your identification of that, what it is, but I completely understand why you feel that way.
Right. I think that's what is so important about us actually understanding people in order to try to win them to Christ is you can't just go and tell someone, hey, you're wrong. Because like you said, they're not hearing it. They're not using the same perspective. They're not seeing things the same way. So what you're going up to them and saying everything about you is wrong, you shouldn't exist, you're wrongness in general, right?
Right,
like
exactly.
There's a How to Train Your Dragon, there's this ongoing joke of where they reference, he's like, you just waved at all of me, and he's like, yeah, all of you, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happens when you come into a conversation in that way without really understanding. I need to understand how they're going to perceive. Like that's the basis of communication, right? But if you're really trying to win someone to Christ, you can't go in and use the same language you would use with a fellow believer because it's not going to be heard the same way. They are literally receiving the information in a different way because their identity and the way they perceive themselves is completely different than you.
Exactly.
And you can't just assume, oh, I get to just walk up and say, you're wrong. And they'll take it as, oh, the thing I'm doing is wrong. I'm inherently loved, right? And that's where we see so much of this issue with Christians are unaccepting, they're not loved, whatever. And there are people that have not done it the right way, right? We can't deny that we're all flawed and that someone at some point. But there is this idea of like the emphasis of you are not wrong. There are things in your life that are not good for you that we're trying to help you with,
see,
right?
I think that's the critical differentiation, and that is that if you're a grandparent or you're a parent or you're a sibling or you have friends that are dealing with same-sex attraction or transgenderism or any of all these things, if like, you know, I remember a conversation back, probably it was when I was in grad school, and it was like a guy comes up and he was in this circle of friends, and he was like, yeah, man, and he said, I'm so attracted to that guy over there. I'm so attracted to that guy over there. Now, the grad school that I was in wasn't a Christian grad school, right? And so there were a lot of non-believers there, and this guy was a non-believer. And now, if he was a Christian, he would say, if he was actively following Christ, another Christian could say to him, yeah, that desire is not right. That's a wrong desire. And then he would go, yeah, you're right. You know, hold me accountable, help encourage me to not act on that desire. But if he's a non-believer and you go, well, that desire is wrong, and his definition is my desires are my identity and who I am, what you just said is not that your desire is wrong. What they heard is you're wrong.
Right.
And see, we have to understand their frame of reference. And so there was another guy. I'm not witty. I'm not a witty person. I wish I was. My wife is the wittiest person. You're in a conversation. She knows exactly the thing to say, right? And she's hilarious and funny. Sometimes, like when I'm talking to one-on-one people, I've had some really close friends of me. We're talking, and they'll go, "Are you mad right now?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not mad at all. Why would you say that?" And they go, "Well, you just kind of zoned out there or something. You know, I just got the impression." I go, "Oh, I'm sorry," because they said something, and then I go through this file in my brain of like, "Oh, that's perfect. It fits right here," and
right.
And I get caught like that little spinning circle on your computer.
Yes.
You know, I'm not
You're
very
processing.
good at that. I'm sure you've experienced that talking
Yes.
to me, and what do? I kind of like.
Woo!
You just gotta come back, Pastor. He's not mad. He's not upset. He's not offended. I'm just filing away. I'm processing, and it takes longer. My dial spins longer than it used to. But this other guy was so witty, and he goes, man, he goes, when you feel that way, what's your strategy for act? Do you go up and talk to him about it? How do you approach another guy and let him know you're interested? And I'm thinking this other Christian guy is asking him how to go pick up a same-sex guy, right? And what was really interesting is then the guy goes, "No, I don't do that anymore." And he goes, "Why not?" He goes, "Because it's just a train wreck, you know." He goes, "The gay lifestyle is just all about sex. That's all it's about. It's not about relationship or intimacy and da-da-da." And I just went, whoa. You see,
that went a completely different route than you thought it was going.
100%. And that's what got me thinking about, wow, the frame of reference. And that situation stuck with me all of these years. And I've always thought about these things. How does it work? I'm always trying to figure this out in my head because there's something real happening there.
Right.
And the Spirit of God always works in truth, always works in the real situation. And so I'm like, wow, what a witty thing to say. Because he didn't say, you're wrong. He said, what do you do? And who ended up saying it was wrong? The guy did.
Right.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
So that was a seed planted. And that's exactly what Paul's talking about. So if you have somebody in your life that's dealing with this, I think it's important to understand. You know, I'd love to spend more time talking about, transgenderism, because that's a huge thing that's really trying to secularize or sexualize our kids today. I know we're over time, but I want to talk about it just for a minute, and that is this. It all comes back to our definition of human nature. And the main issue in transgenderism today is that it attempts to maximize a normal stage of human development. You remember how we were talking about the anthropomorphical type thing with animals? Well, guess what a lot of kids do? They identify with the opposite gender, right?
Right.
And all psychologists tell you this, is that you grow out of it. 80-90% of all kids grow out of it. The 10% that don't, right, is usually because it's a trauma response. And now the fact that I said that, a lot of people are just going to go way over top, say that I'm transphobic because I said that. But that's the truth, right? It's not wrong to diagnose properly. And so, but the reason why it's happening is it focuses all on children in order to try to sexualize them. Take a normal, right, stage of human development and then lock kids into it. And I have some articles here that I wanted about is that transgender activists say that your kids have a right, a human right to have gender affirming surgeries. So they have a right to carve up their bodies, to mutilate their bodies. Here's an article. It's by John Daniel Davidson. It's in the Federalist, which is a highly respectable journal. Here's another one from the Federalist from the same guy. He goes, the trans movement is coming for your kids. You know, these childhood drag shows, all these things are trying to get kids. So when a kid says, hey, you know, your 4-year-old wants to hang out with mom one day and, oh, mom, I want to put on your shoes and put lipstick on my face and stuff like that. You go, oh, that's silly. You know, They want to lock kids into that. And they want to do it because what people don't want to realize, and I was reading a psychologist who was talking about this, he says the main reason why is because of pedophilia. And that is, if kids can make a decision about their gender at 4 or 5 years old, then they should be able to make a decision about sexual activity at 4 or 5 years old. And the entire law that protects children from sexual abuse is based on the principle or concept of consent. Mm-hmm. And that is, when you're 5, you can't consent to anything.
Right.
Because you don't know. Your brain isn't developed enough. When you're 14, you can't consent to a adult sexual relationship. Why? Because you're 14.
Right.
It doesn't matter how many TV shows or books you've read. And what's really interesting now is people are unaware that they're trying to make this standard public curriculum. In Maryland, an entire school district said, we have an LGBTQ curriculum. Your students will be taught this. And so the parents went to court and sued. And the court ruled that parents had not shown how the policy would violate their children's rights to exercise of religion, and so they are not allowed to opt their children out of this curriculum. So you're in Maryland, in this school district, your elementary school children will be taken to school and will be taught this curriculum. You cannot tell me that that is not an intent to sexualize children.
Well, Pastor, you've given us a lot to think about today, and I think we've had some good discussions. So I am hoping that you, the listener, have also taken away as much as I have in this, and will have as much to think about as I have. We thank you guys so much for joining us. We know we ran a little long today, but we thank you for sticking with us to the end, because this is not something we want to skimp on as we're trying to really decide how we're going to move forward and what we believe and why we believe it. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you next week here on the Salty Pastor Podcast.
Blessings, and keep thinking for yourself.